Hello, everybody. My name is James Corsi, and welcome to the Global Spaceport Alliance webinar series. This is the final webinar of the year, and arguably, we've left the best for last. Launching from down under. It's going to be a very, very interesting hour. And I would like today just to touch on a few things before we enter the main program. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors, RS&H and Merrick as platinum sponsors, BRPH, Parsons, and the Italian Trade Agency as gold sponsors, and our silver sponsors are HDR and MITRE Corporation. Since our last webinar, we're very pleased to say we've added 4 new members: Nord Space, running the Canadian spaceport, Amentum, the MITRE Corporation, and Michael Baker International. This brings our total membership to over 82 members, which we're very, very pleased with. Within our membership, we also are very well represented by the Australians, surprisingly. And we have the South Australia, the government of South Australia, Equatorial Launch, Southern Launch, Space Centre Australia, and Spaceport Australia. Also, several of our members are already engaged in the Australian market. RS&H, BRPH, Parsons, HDR, Air Liquide, of course, KBR, International Space University, XARC, and Lindy. Now, one of the big things every year, what we call our Spaceport Summit, placed on January 27, 25. If any of you have not registered for the summit yet, we really want you to do that as quickly as possible. The theme is going to be building an economic powerhouse around your spaceport. And we have a bunch of really, really exciting sessions that will make the day be invaluable for your participation. The meeting for the Spaceport Summit kicks off what we call Commercial Space Week. So on the 27th of January, we have the Global Spaceport Summit. This is followed on the 28th of January by the Space Mobility, which is an event that we do in conjunction with Space Force, the US Space Force. And that's backed up finally on the 29th and 30th by SpaceCom, which is done in collaboration with the 51st Space Congress. Again, if you have not registered for SpaceCom or Space Mobility, we strongly encourage you to do so and take advantage of early registration discounts. If you are a member of GSA, you would be becoming a part of the largest network of spaceports in the world. And frankly, if you have not yet had an opportunity to join, we strongly encourage you to do that. Not only do you get sponsorship and promotion opportunities, you get tickets to the Spaceport Summit at no additional cost, of course, but the discounts to SpaceCom and Space Mobility, if you bring 2 or 3 people, can practically pay for the total membership within GSA. One of the other things that we do with our members is we encourage them to participate in subject matters that they are really interested in. And as you can see, we've got 6 at the moment: commercial spaceflight research, spaceport infrastructure funding, point-to-point, academic, workforce development, policy, and outreach. Each of these has a leader to it. And if anybody on the call wants to join one of these advisory groups, please reach out to myself or Steve Wolf or Izzy House, and we will make sure that that happens. So now what I'd like to do is turn it over to our chairman, George Neild, and he will introduce the panel and moderate the rest of the evening. Thank you. George, over to you.
Thank you, James. So this has been a busy time in the space community, and particularly for spaceports. Just to review a couple of the highlights. Back in October, we had the Global Spaceport Alliance co-sponsor, along with the FAA Office of Spaceports, a first ever international spaceport meeting in Milan, Italy. And that was taking place the day before the IAC, International Astronautical Congress. We had a great turnout there, a lot of good discussion. Most of the attendees were either regulators or spaceport operators, and I think everyone really appreciated the chance to get together and share ambitions and lessons learned and challenges in the same way that we have been trying to do with GSA for some time. So there was a lot of interest in follow-on discussions, and we'll be working with the FAA to see what kinds of additional meetings like that we can schedule in the future. Later on in October, of course, GSA had a webinar on international partnering on spaceport launch capability with representatives from the Swedish Space Corporation, Firefly Aerospace, and Air Liquide. And that was an excellent one. And then last month, I had the privilege of co-chairing, along with Oscar Garcia, the annual High-Speed Aerospace Transportation Workshop, which took place in Midland, Texas. And that's sort of a unique gathering because it focuses on subsonic, supersonic, hypersonic, and suborbital vehicles, particularly with the hope of achieving a point-to-point transportation at high rates of speed, which is something that GSA is very interested in. And as James mentioned, we have an advisory group on that subject, and good discussions on that. We'll hear a summary of some of the things that were done at the Spaceport Summit in January. Today we've got an excellent webinar for the group, and our speakers include Enrico Palermo, head of the Australian Space Agency, and next, Sandy Turkey, Senior Director of Global Commercial Launch Services, Michael Jones, Group CEO for Equatorial Launch Australia, or ELA, and Lloyd Damp, CEO of Southern Launch. And so we'll be allowing each of them to speak for a few minutes about their organization and what's going on in their activities, and then we'll have a chance for some Q&A for the whole group. At the end of the panel, we'll also have an additional speaker from Australia, and we'll say more about that a little bit later in the broadcast. So why don't we start with Enrico. Enrico Palermo became head of the Australian Space Agency in 2021 after 14 years at Virgin Galactic, where he was one of the first 10 employees. His journey began in 2006 at the International Space University's summer session in France, where he met Alex Tai, COO of Virgin Galactic. And by the end of the year, Enrico ended up joining Virgin Galactic, and he developed a business plan for the spaceship company, which became its manufacturing arm. After 2 years in London, Enrico moved to Mojave, California to establish the spaceship company, creating the team, facilities, and processes to build reusable space planes. He witnessed key milestones like Virgin Mothership Eve's first flight and rarely missed Spaceship Two test flights, often emceeing real-time updates. A highlight of his career was informing Sir Richard Branson that his spaceship had reached space. By the time Enrico left Virgin Galactic, he had become Chief Operating Officer, overseeing 3 companies and over 1,000 employees. He also led the donation of VSS Unity's rocket motor to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. In 2021, he took on the role of head of the Australian Space Agency, calling it an immense honor. Enrico aims to deliver on the Australian civil space strategy by creating jobs, inspiring the nation, and expanding Australia's role in the global space sector. Despite being a smaller agency, he believes the Australian Space Agency is having an outsized impact and looks forward to its continued growth. Enrico, great to see you tonight. Over to you.
George, lovely to reconnect. Hope you're well, and thanks for that long introduction, very kind introduction. So, good morning, good evening to colleagues around the world. It's an absolute pleasure to dial in and join this webinar today with a focus on launch and returns activity in Australia. So I'm dialing in from our national capital, Canberra, and let me acknowledge I'm on this call from the traditional custodians of the land of the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I thought I'd start. We've got a few minutes to chat. I wanted to do a few minutes, and I'll have the slide come up in a moment. We can have that down for the moment. I want to give a quick orientation on who the Australian Space Agency is, our core functions priority, because that sets the scene around our regulatory role and how Australia's space ecosystem is developing rapidly. And a main message I want to leave with the community is, from my perspective, Australia is open for launch and we're open for returns, and it's a very dynamic and exciting time to be partnering and doing business here. So the Australian Space Agency was established in 2018, and we contribute to Australia's wellbeing and prosperity through the responsible use of space. And government has us deliver on 5 core functions I'll touch on briefly. The first is to lead and coordinate space policy across government. Like every government in the world, there's many agencies that use space data or space services for the needs of the nation. And so how do we have the best coordinated approach to policy development and investment across government? So that's a key role, and some of our key thrusts of activity right now around how do we develop the right space ecosystem in Australia. How do we also look at sustainability? So we just consulted in Australia around what may a sustainability of space activities policy look for government. So lead and coordinate space policy is number 1. 2 is shaping and growing Australia's space capability for the benefit of the nation. Primarily, we've done this through over 70 sector-facing procurements and grants that have seen us install infrastructure around the nation, such as new tracking stations or mission control centres and the like, testing facilities, but also looking at uplifting space heritage. Australia's space heritage is rapidly growing, partly through our grant programs and investments of the private ecosystem, and then generally looking how we can integrate Australian technology into international programs and supply chains, such as Artemis with our friends in the US. The third is, until we had a space agency, it wasn't clear who was that sort of front door for engagement with the other space agencies around the world. So we lead international civil space partnerships, and we do that to create opportunities for Australia and our partners in support of foreign policy objectives. I just came back from hosting with our friends at JAXA, the Japanese Exploration Agency, what's called the Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum, which is the largest regional forum here in Asia Pacific between space agencies, and we're excited to be going forward to IAC in Sydney next year. As part of an international role, we negotiate treaties as well, and I'll talk about the Technology Safeguards Agreement in a moment. And then the fourth area, which is very relevant to the talk today, is promoting a responsible sector, and we do that through guidance and regulation. So the Australian Space Agency, similar, I guess, to our friends in New Zealand and a couple other places around, also is the regulator. So we administer what's called the Space Launch and Returns Act in Australia, as well as work in multilateral forums such as UN COPIUS. And then finally, probably no surprise, we know space provides that spark of curiosity. A big agenda for us is to inspire the nation, educate on the benefits of access to space, but also how we develop that next generation diverse STEM workforce. So that's a very quick orientation around our 5 core functions. As I said, the main message I wanted to deliver today is Australia is open for launch and returns. We want to partner with the world to enable your missions, to bring resiliency, to bring flexibility to your launch needs. And I do want to acknowledge partners, our friends at Austrace, the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, who do remarkable work, particularly in the US and around the world, in telling this story, and I give my thanks to them. But what makes Australia special? There's obviously a lot of partners are developing spaceports and spaceflight ecosystems. So I just want to offer respectively why I see a big opportunity for you all. Most obvious we always talk about is our geography, our climate, low air traffic corridor, low traffic in our air corridors and our marine corridors to allow flexible and reliable launch. Obviously, big nation with a relatively small population, and so that means our population density is low. There's not many places in the world where you can return objects from space, for example, and cross a beautiful coastline with not many people. So we have those sort of geographic benefits to leverage, but it goes much deeper than that. One is we are active. The Australian, as I said, we regulate what's called the Space Launch and Returns Act. We have fully cycled our legislation in Australia. We've had launch attempts. We've licensed spaceports. We've licensed many Australian objects in space. So we are actively implementing our regulations. In many respects, I see 2024 as a bellwether of what's to come. So if we can bring up that one slide in the pack, there's sort of three things that I want to signify, and a fourth off this slide that really are the bellwether moment. And some of the partners are speaking on the call today can talk to these further. We saw Australia's first high-powered rocket launch under our high-powered rules earlier this year from the Caniber site with Southern Launch and German company High Impulse. This was a first and demonstrated the value of our suborbital overland ranges. Recently, we awarded the first multi-mission commercial return authorization to Australia with VADA, again with Southern Launch in their Caniber range. But we're really excited about the potential for Australia to be a returns destination for science, for missions, for advanced manufacturing orbit. And most recently, we issued the first orbital launch permit to Gilmour Space Technologies for their first launch attempt of Eris-1 from their licensed spaceport on the Queensland coast here in Australia. So a lot has happened in the last year. I think these are all signs of trends of increasing activity, and it's a pretty special time in that respect. The third point I want to hit on is we are a trusted partner for sensitive technology. We have a responsible regulatory framework. We have a stable political system, so we can protect sensitive technology of our partners. Another part of the bellwether of 2024, working on across government and with our colleagues in the State Department and interagencies in the US, we finalised the Technology Safeguards Agreement between the US and Australia. And just off the back of that, we are seeing an increase in demand and interest at commercial spaceports that are taking advantage of these things we've covered. And then the fourth point, and I'll leave it there because I want to give others a chance to speak, is we're a modern regulator with a continual improvement mindset. As I said, our act is active. It's written into our act for us to balance or ensure a reasonable balance between removals of barrier to participation and encouragement of innovation and entrepreneurship, but also balancing that with the safety and risk of damage to persons or property as a result of space activities, and obviously maintaining our international obligations under the treaties. So safety and supporting innovation, entrepreneurship in Australia is not an either-or proposition, and core to our act and how we operate. And we have a continual improvement mindset. We've now been through several activities where we just finished consultation on a second set of rule changes that are looking to essentially remove, I'm not going to say red tape, but remove steps that don't impact safety or impact public property. So how do we continue to evolve? And we've now published guidelines. We have an expression of interest process that are really aimed at further facilitating the process. So thanks for letting me chat briefly, George, up front. I'll leave it there, but the main message was we're open for launch, and it's a really dynamic time, and we look forward to partnering with colleagues on the phone. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. That was excellent, and we'll be calling upon you for some questions after the other speakers have had their opportunity to speak for a few minutes. So next up is Sandy Turdy. Dr. Sandy Turdy is Rocket Lab's Director of Global Commercial Launch Services and the company's launch director. Dr. Turdy joined Rocket Lab in 2013 as Vehicle Team Lead, where he supervised the development and construction of the Electron launch vehicle. In 2015, Dr. Turdy took on the role of Vice President of Vehicle Systems before becoming Rocket Lab's launch conductor in 2016. In this role, Dr. Turdy led missions operators through the successful launches of It's a Test and Still Testing in 2017 and 2018, respectively. Today, Dr. Turdy is the Director of Global Commercial Launch Services and is based in Brisbane, Australia. In this role, he supports small satellite operators globally to access orbit through frequent and reliable launch opportunities on the Electron launch vehicle. Thank you very much, Sandy, for being here, and we look forward to your talk.
Thanks, George, for the introduction. I hope you're hearing me loud and clear.
Yes.
Well, I thought I would have an appropriate background for this webinar. So there's a few messages I want to get through. The first one is we are a company that started in New Zealand, really beginning of 2013. The company is slightly older than this, but before that we were just a couple of guys doing a few early projects. And then we became a little bit later a US company. We mostly launched out of New Zealand. We had 56 launches so far. And I think out of the 56, it would be probably, I think, 53 out of New Zealand and 3 out of the US. When we started in 2013, New Zealand was definitely not a space launching nation. In fact, you could not find a single engineer in New Zealand and in Australia that had developed a cryogenic orbital launch vehicle. And not only this, but the country was not really set up for supporting this kind of activity. So all our engagement and we had tremendous support of the government led to many things. First of all, the whole regulatory framework. The New Zealand Space Agency was created. The first TSA was created between New Zealand and the US. From a technical standpoint, we started engaging with a whole bunch of different industries that were doing great work but never worked on space, whether it's the high-speed boating industry, composite industry, the whole car industry. And working with all of them, we taught them and taught ourselves how to do space. And so a first message I want to give is, first of all, space is a business. Space is not what it was 20 years ago. It's not the space that people imagined during the Cold War, where nations sank massive amount of money to achieve a dream. Space generates revenue. And launch generates revenue, satellites generate revenue, applications generate the largest amount of revenue. It just happened that you need launch to get there. So launch need to be seen as an enabler. And the goal is really, what does this application deliver commercially and in terms of capability for the country and for people in general. Today in New Zealand, space is larger than the wine industry. There's a whole bunch of new companies that have been created in the last probably 4 years that are doing space as well, and it's a very flourishing industry. I deeply wish to see this as well in Australia. There are a lot of companies in Australia that do great work in space, and I think I describe the space industry in Australia as a combustion chamber full of oxidizer and propellant that is just waiting for the igniter to really roar. So first message is, space generates business, generate revenue, but it really lifts the rest of the economy, because this was Kennedy's word, right? We do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And by doing hard things, you improve what you can do. The second message that I want to deliver, and it's more about Rocket Lab, we see ourselves as an end-to-end company. So it's almost unfortunate these days that there's the word rocket in our name, because people see us as just mostly a rocket launch company. 2/3 of our revenue come from actually a space system. We have 40 satellites being built. We are the prime for the MDA Tranche 2 program. And we talked about Varda before. Well, the Varda spacecraft, so that hosts the capsule, is built by Rocket Lab and operated by Rocket Lab. So we will command the re-entry on Australian soil, and we're very happy about that choice because it is much easier to hit a large area like the Kaniba launch range than making sure that you're not hitting Las Vegas when you try to land in Nevada. So we feel very happy about that choice. I'll leave the floor to my next to my colleagues, but thank you very much for giving me the microphone.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandy. Excellent. Thank you, Sandy. Next up, we have Michael Jones. Michael Jones brings over 30 years of senior management experience across roles such as CEO, company director, investment banker, and test pilot. After a distinguished career as an experimental test pilot, he held leadership positions at Raytheon Australia, Smart Communication Group, and the Aerospace Group, along with advisory roles at Boeing and Airbus. As the founder and inaugural CEO of Regional Express, Michael also served on numerous boards and co-founded Canterbury Hill Advisory, completing over $2 billion in transactions across various industries. Before joining ELA in 2021, he served as CEO of AWH and Chief Strategy Officer at Virgin Australia. At ELA, Michael has restructured the company, led capital raises, and overseen the development of the Arnhem Space Centre, achieving Australia's first commercial launch and hosting 3 NASA launches in 15 days. The ASC is now positioned as a leading multi-user commercial spaceport. Michael is a graduate of the Royal Military College, Duntroon, and the Empire Test Pilot Schools, UK, with degrees in economics, applied science, finance, and a PhD from the Sorbonne. A fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, he also maintains a parallel career in elite sports management, including leadership roles at the Beijing Olympics and the Brumbles rugby team. Michael, it's great to have you on here. Over to you.
Nice to be here, George, and thanks for having us. Can everybody see that okay? It's hard to work out. But,
yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, so basically I wanted to go through sort of us, hard to follow Sandy and the 50+ launches that Rocket Lab does, and also with his background of the beautiful green grass where I get spaceport and launch pad envy all the time, looking at Mahi and how pretty that is. Nevertheless, we see ourselves as a space infrastructure company, and we're morphing into also being a launch services company where whatever our customers and wherever they come from want, we try to provide them. And that's given rise to our sort of new tagline that you build the rockets and we'll do the rest for you. And a lot of that is just circumstantial from the commercial reality of when we talk to customers, whether they be in Europe, etc. The concept of coming to Australia to launch initially is a pretty challenging idea. So we've had to develop our service offering to try and accommodate the market and to basically match ourselves to that. And a large part of that is the provision of services that would be an impediment. And so we use a concept where we try to stand in the shoes of our customers and basically provide them, you know, for answers to all the reasons why they wouldn't launch with us, and come up with compelling and comprehensive responses to that. So sort of our main thing is what are our points of difference? You know, we're an equatorial spaceport. There are very few spaceports near the equator, and particularly in first world stable geopolitical environments that we have in Australia, with a really good regulatory environment like Enrico mentioned in his speech. The other thing that's attractive, you know, rocket companies who are our customers, they're all about the launch and the dynamics. And so the physicality, the geographical advantages of having a wide range of orbits from an equatorial 12-degree launch all the way through to an SSO. And that's afforded by the unique geography of Australia. Overall, you know, launching from Northern Territory, the population base is, you know, 0.02 people per square kilometre, which means that we have to try very hard to get anywhere near a casualty expectation or risk hazard analysis that doesn't comply. So over launch, really from a technical perspective, is achievable. We just need to manage that, so that we have a long-term process of it. We also take, as I said, a comprehensive approach of most of our customers have a fair amount of money, but they're startups nevertheless, and they're all husbanding their cash. So we've taken, as I said, the approach where we are an infrastructure company. So we provide the services to our clients, and we try to do a comprehensive set of services. But going back to the point of, it's the geography of being near the equator and providing a really wide range of orbits. And it depends where the customer's coming from, where their target markets are. We also have two main principles of life, one of which is we always expect that our customers will maintain a secondary launch location in their home region, and that's to capture those institutional launches. And if you're an American, launching out of the United States on a continual basis is an essential thing. The second thing is, for European. So, we always expect them to maintain that. We also expect that they will generally do, and we call it two and away. They'll do their two primary qualifications and test launches at their home location. Now, that's not always the case. We have a number of customers who are proposing to do their initial test launches with us, but conceptually, we expect them to do their main launches at home and then come to us. So it's the expectation and the removal of the, restrictions of how often you can launch and the wide range of orbits that we do. And to facilitate that, one of the things that we've done is we've invested a lot of time and energy into developing a high-tech solution that makes it easy for people to launch with us. So we have a standard pad configuration which accounts for acoustics, thermal properties, provision of services. And we've taken the view that NASA and the European Space Agency for the last 70 years have been, the stewards of the space industry, but we want to be the leaders in the future for providing, good technology, reliable launch, very safe, and to be able to do high cadence. And we unashamedly have learnt from the leaders in the industry, and Rocket Lab and Sandy are definitely in that thing. And we pay respect to what they've achieved, and like SpaceX, try to emulate a lot of those and improve upon it and come up with a better mousetrap. So our advanced launch pad, is now pretty robust in its design, and we have 3 customers who are wanting to license our pad technology so that they can use it either at Kennedy, Saxonboard, and a number of other locations. And we think that that is a great indictment of what we're doing and the model and the concept of what we're doing. Likewise, we're a long way away from the rest of the world, and we need to provide world-class services that enhance the operation of our customers rather than detract from it. And so to do that, each customer is allocated a space launch complex, which has a fully comprehensive horizontal integration facility, which allows assembly and payload management. And that includes, they all come standard with overhead cranes, clean rooms, all the facilities for, having at least 30 people on site on a long-term semi-permanent basis. And that's our model of, providing 7 of those to our customers in what's called a resident launcher model. And then we have a number of multi-user pads, which are configured the same, but they're not leased out on a long-term basis. And that sort of configuration and lease that we talk about is one of the things that is our point of difference. Our model is such that we expend the money up front, and that's why we make the comment about being an infrastructure company, and we plan to re-earn that money back over a longer period of time so that the cash flow of our customers isn't damaged. As I said, they're all startups as well, and we want to make it so that it's an attractive commercial proposition as well as an optimal technical solution. Part of that is providing world-class services that they would get anywhere else. So we're investing a lot of money, time, energy, and technology into having a world-class launch and mission controls, and cognizant of the fact that as participants in the TSA and the technology exchange with the United States, our systems are split so that we can separate and isolate. And we had the advantage through our NASA launch campaigns, of participating in a TAA, and understanding what the requirements are for the management of everybody's commercial and national secrets. And so we apply that equally to everybody. So each of the sites is secure, and the fact that they're a commercial company from wherever they are, they're afforded the same level of respect as US government customers. And so that's the basic concept that we do. As I said, in finishing off, one of the things that we like to do is to try to stand in the shoes of our customers and go, why wouldn't you launch with ELA, and why wouldn't you come to Australia? And then to critically analyse that and provide a solution. And so we've worked tirelessly over the last 5 years to come up with an answer of what are the shipping schedules, how do you get here, how do you support and accommodate people from the far side of the world, how do you get payloads and integrate them, how do you manage the remoteness, what facilities are available, and how do you manage 7, 8 different customers, all from different locations at various times. So having a team who can work with and be world-class in orbital dynamics, working with the Office of the Regulator, working with the locals, etc., in each of our locations, and how do we do our operations. And that's the main thing, and we're always learning. And we have one of the big advantages is that we travel a lot. We interact with a lot of rocket companies, a lot of payload companies, and we're constantly learning. And the camaraderie and the generosity of the industry has been one of the big things that I've noticed. And I've been in a lot of different industries, but I'm really pleased to say that this industry is great, and that's why we've been able to, we feel, move up the pecking order to a degree of being a real spaceport, having facilities, having customers and contracts, and we're really excited about what the future holds for us. So George, that sort of sees me out.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. All right, next up we have Lloyd Damp. Lloyd is the CEO of Southern Launch. He's responsible for developing and delivering the strategy across the company. Lloyd brings with him a unique experience relating to the design and safe operation of rocket systems across a number of size classes. In 2006, Lloyd graduated with a degree in space engineering from the University of Sydney and holds a master's in aerostructural optimization, a graduate certificate in applied project management, and a graduate certificate in scientific leadership. In a career spanning over 12 years in defense research, Lloyd has led teams to deliver leapfrog technologies across numerous technology fronts. In his spare time, Lloyd has contributed towards eye research, been a surf lifesaver, and represented Australia in Ironman 70.3. He is married with 2 daughters who are dreaming of one day becoming astronauts, and I want to wish them all the best. It is awesome. So over to you, Lloyd.
Thank you, George. And I'm just perfect. No, thank you everyone for joining us today. We've had a power outage in Adelaide all of a sudden, so if the lights turn on and off a few times, that's just things coming back to normal. So a little bit of an overview of Southern Launch for those of you who don't know us. We started in 2017, so right at the same time that the Australian Space Agency was announced. And so we've been growing as a company right as Australia has become a space-capable nation once again. So it's been a very interesting journey, as Michael has said, and very similar to the journey that Sandy spoke about earlier, that New Zealand themselves have gone through. So it's very exciting to start to think forward as to what a future Australian space industry could look like. So thank you to GSA and everyone else who's putting together these very informative webinars. Key thing with Southern Launch is that based on the experience in the company, we provide what an end-to-end launch service. We recently expanded into supporting returns as well, which I'll talk a little bit about in a couple of slides' time. Our 2 key launch ranges. I'll just jump to the next slide. So we have two ranges here in Australia. The first one I'll talk quickly about is called the Kiniba Test Range. So it is right by the green splodges in the middle of the screen, so to speak. That range is 4 times the size of White Sands Missile Range. So that's sitting at 41,000 square kilometers. So a very, very large uninhabited part of Australia. The Kiniba Test Range head is very close to the regional town of Ceduna. And Ceduna is the crossing point in Australia between Perth on the west and Sydney on the east. So it's relatively easy to access the site and undertake operations from it. Because of where Ceduna is, there's lots of hotels and accommodation, simplifying all of those different logistics, usually nightmares. But the key functions with the Kiniba Test Range is that because of its size, it can host suborbital launches primarily to test vehicles themselves, so testing out new different types of propulsion, as well as then hosting payload experiments. So this is both then your standard microgravity style experiments, as well as what we're seeing ever increasing interest in hypersonics. Key thing being with an overland test range, naturally, you can do the activity and then go and pick up hopefully the payload, not just the pieces afterwards. So operators can gain a lot of insight into the operation or the performance of their technologies. So moving down then south to the tip of what's known as the Eyre Peninsula on Australia's southern coastline there is where we have our Whalers Way Orbital Launch Complex. Interestingly, this site we chose for several reasons, safety and the likes, but also because it is a 35-minute drive from the regional city of Port Lincoln. Now, Port Lincoln is a short flight from Adelaide, and Adelaide is where I'm sitting today and the home of the Australian Space Agency. So getting to Whalers Way is also very, very simple. Not that I have any shares in Port Lincoln itself as a town, but interestingly, it's Australia's richest postcode. So lots of 4-star hotels, even a Michelin-hatted restaurant and wineries and the like. So, excuse me, come for a space launch and have a fantastic time while you're there. But moving on to the practicalities of where Whalers Way is and what it's specifically designed to do is you can see from the launch fan at the bottom of the image, the key thing from the site is being able to support launches from around 60-degree inclinations all the way through to retrograde. So very, very wide range of potential launch azimuths, very little maritime and air traffic, as Enrico pointed out, traverses across the Great Australian Bight, so between Melbourne and Perth, or even internationally for that matter. So key thing being from this site is the ability to support high cadence launch operations, launch when you want to, when you need to. So a very big draw card from the site. Just jumping into the sites a little bit more specifically. So Whalers Way, we've just secured the final very large approval to develop the site. Now, the site is 1,600 hectares, so 16 square kilometers in size. And initially, we're going to be developing 2 further launch pads. In addition to the existing pad in the image on the right-hand side. Because of where it is, I should also mention it also supports hypersonic testing out over water. So with the Australian coastline the way it is, it means that the launch can occur out over the water and you can put your telemetry and flight termination equipment along the coastline of Australia. So a relatively cost-effective approach to undertaking these types of historically very expensive flight tests. The range is fully instrumented, so we've recently procured a 6-meter telemetry dish from the US, which is currently sitting on a ship. So that'll get installed in the next couple of months and become operational. Jumping across to the Kaniba test range, as I said, this range is 4 times the size of Wisma, so a very large, very useful tract of land. We have a large linear rail, so it can currently host vehicles up to about 9,500 pounds in weight, so sizable vehicles. What I also wanted to add is, and mention it earlier, is because of where Kaniba is and the large open land that we have access to, we then can host orbital returns as well. And we have a very large hangar facility that we then provide as part of our service offering to our customers, so that once the capsules have returned to Earth, they can be unpacked, the pharmaceuticals or the high-grade silicon can be extracted from the capsules and then sent anywhere, not only in Australia, but around the world from that one location. Our approach is very similar to what Michael was also talking to, because the Australian regulations are different to the European or the FAA, the American regulations. We take on all of that work, and we've successfully secured several space launch permits through the Australian Space Agency, as well as then securing, as Enrico said, the VADA return capsules as well into the Kaniba test range. So our team has a lot of experience understanding the nuances of Australian regulations and taking our customers' information and simplifying that entire process for them. Ultimately, our goal is to let the smart rocket scientists focus on what they do best, literally the rocket science aspect of it. And we then handle all of the other ancillary approvals to get that done. And where this then ties into is one of the key approvals that we've secured for both of our launch ranges is all of the environmental approvals. So the approvals we have on hand are not vehicle specific. They cover liquids, hybrids, and solids of varying sizes, varying propulsion or propellant combinations, which is, we've done it to simplify engagements or activities on our ranges. One key thing I wanted to highlight, and this has been a central ethos in the company, is how we've engaged with the community and developed a space launch capability in a part of Australia that these are relatively remote locations, so they wouldn't have access to museums or the like. So we work really closely with the local communities to talk about space and help educate people on the benefit of space. And wanted to thank the Andy Thomas Foundation, which is a foundation here in Australia that recently helped us engage with over 600 school kids across regional South Australia, talking to them about rocket launch and capsule re-entries and the benefits that this plays not only to their local areas around high technology jobs and the likes, but also more broadly how space supports future developments, right? And the role that Australia can play in building out that capability. And this then all feeds into developing a sustainable space industry here in Australia, because as Sandy indicated, when space started in New Zealand, there was very little industry. And so all of the adjacent industries then start to contribute in, and they themselves expand their service offerings into this new and exciting world. So working very closely to make space enduring for Australia so that in 10, 20, 30 decades to come, or 20 years rather, this is an everyday occurrence. Space launch and returns, that is. This is my final slide, so you don't get death by PowerPoint, but a very interesting seed I want to plant in everyone's mind here is that as we, as a global industry, start to support more launches, more returns from orbit, so this then enables a new industry approach where space becomes more than just satellites and Earth observation and RF, which is what we've always, so to speak, used space for. But we can start to do more advanced manufacturing on orbit, better pharmaceuticals, new approaches to developing quantum computers, and start to potentially give us, humanity, the tools to tackle some of the more enduring problems that we as a civilization face now and into the future. So I'm really looking forward to more launches occurring, more people working out how we can use this fantastic resource right above us, being zero gravity, to enable the future. So thank you so much for letting me join today. And I look forward to the discussions that come from it.
Thank you, Lloyd. Excellent presentation. Okay, well, let's move into the Q&A portion. And if listeners have some questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box, and we'll see if we can cover most of those before we wrap things up here today. Let me start with Enrico. Given your experience with Virgin Galactic and the spaceship company, you've had a chance to see how both the UK and the US governments deal with space. What are some of the similarities and differences that you can see between the Australian Space Agency and the responsibilities and the approaches used in the UK and the US? Any observations from your experience?
Thanks, George. I mean, I think at a base level, we have similar objectives. And, if you look at the stats for things like E-sub-C, very similar requirements for protection of public safety and public property. We don't sort of deviate very far from what the US has in the flight safety code, and certainly point to standards. And that's important. If we want to have a globally resilient launch sector, how do we harmonize or recognize and as different operators consider launching at different places around the planet, how do we do that? And we're in constant discussion with our colleagues at FAA AST about that. So I think there is a lot in common. Much like in the US too, it is a multi-regulatory jurisdiction process. So as the regulated space activities, when we go to our minister for an authorization, we have to demonstrate all the necessary state and federal approvals are in place, such as environmental and state development and cultural heritage things. And I think probably that's where the local regulatory framework's different, just because every country has different acts for its environmental protection. We have significant First Nations considerations in Australia, which New Zealand and others have as well. So I see similarities sort of when you get down to the nuts and bolts, having a flight safety termination system that's single fault tolerant. Those sort of core elements, I think, are consistent. You get that localization in some of the other regulatory frameworks. We're continuing to evolve as well, and we learn and watch what other jurisdictions are doing.
Very good. Thank you. Sandy, one for you. Rocket Lab is currently operating out of both New Zealand and the US at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. Do you see the need to conduct operations from any additional locations at some point in the future?
That's a good question. So from a launch provider point of view, you try to have as least ranges as possible, because range is an asset and therefore there's costs. However, a range always has a certain flight corridor that are approved and some that are not. So we've been quite lucky with our range in New Zealand. We can go to SSO down to 40 degrees, which is a good a good variety of inclinations that we can cover. However, there's obviously some inclination we cannot cover. We cannot do retrograde. We cannot go equatorial. We cannot do these things. Electron has been focused on small satellite and dedicated launch for small satellites. And for that specific market, I've had very few requests for equatorial, so very low inclination, or for retrograde. It has happened, but it's not a common thing. Now that Rocket Lab is developing Neutron, which is a Falcon 9 competitor, Falcon 9 class vehicle, that is a different that's a different market. And so what you can see is access to lower inclination and closer to the equator to do GTO or GEO becomes important. However, the location where you launch is also it's also important from a strategic point of view of the program you try to capture. A lot of people are launching from the Cape because it gives them an advantage of working with the state of Florida and getting that support, and obviously launching close to where a lot of satellites are being built and other companies that are present. So this is something that you have in mind. It's like any engineering problem, it's a compromise. On one hand, you can have some range that have a lot of availability because they're not super busy and deliver the right inclinations. On the other hand, you can go to a place like the Cape, very busy, a lot of constraint on your operation, but you may have an economic advantage. So it's really a trade-off to be done. So this is a very long answer to a short question, but yes, as we are expanding our offering, we're looking for new launch locations. We launch from Wallops as well for our large launch vehicle. And really, it will come down to a business decision.
Very good. Thank you. Michael, you've traveled extensively and visited spaceports across the U.S. and Europe and Asia Pacific. What are some of the key differences or similarities between the spaceports that you have visited? Do you see standardization? Is there a need for standardization? Or is it a case of everybody has their own approach? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, George. I would say that no two are alike. It's a function of their geography, the target market that they're in, and obviously you could categorize them into sort of two different sections. There's the established spaceports who have been there for a long time, and they're generally characterized by been established by sovereign entities, and the budget and expenditure in there is extensive. And then there is the new crop like ourselves who are aspiring to be established spaceports on a long-term basis, and we face the same challenges of budget, technology evolution, and securing customers. And customers is a continually evolving marketplace, with people like ABL, for instance, looking like a front runner and then completely doing a pivot to say we're going into missiles and getting out of commercial space. So that has driven a change in sort of how that's done. But one thing that's consistent is space is hard and you can't leave anything to gap. So everybody we come in contact with generally is aspiring to be a very professional organization and meeting the same baseline standards. And what I'm talking about there is, like Lloyd talked about, like Sandy has, everybody has to do the same thing for safety, tracking, meeting regulatory requirements, and they're well founded. So early on, I sort of had in my mind that, having come from an aviation background, both military and commercial, that, we were lacking an ICAO, who was the international body that drew everything together under one set of standardization. But I've sort of separated from that over time because the industry is so bespoke and every customer and every mission is so unique that you really have to be adaptable rather than being rigidly regulated in having standardization. There are certain concepts and certain baselines of standards for safety that you need to meet, but I'm now not a huge advocate of standardization, because I think you could spin your wheels and spend a lot of time, and I'm not sure that it's entirely necessary. I think some harmonization of regulatory bodies, and over time the removal of some of what I would call the institutional parochialism that's there, not by intent, but because it's happened. And a good example is, Sirius, a contracted customer of us under French law, still needs to be managed by CNES, even though they'll be launching from Australia under the auspices of the Australian Space Agency. So that really requires the two space agencies to have a bilateral agreement of how are they going to manage that. And if the space agency in Australia assesses a launch vehicle and a launch operation as being safe, having the home organisation like CNES accept that. So that's the bigger challenge and the more sort of important and immediate concern that I have in relation to ongoing operations. As I said, I'm not massively, I won't say I'm not supportive, I just don't see the need for a massive standardisation program right at this point in time on a technical aspect.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, Lloyd, you talked a little bit about this in your opening comments, but could you tell us a little bit more about the Kaniba Community Aboriginal Corporation? What does that partnership look like, and why is that important to you?
No, thanks, George. Look, it's been an interesting journey, you could say, with the Kaniba community. So for everyone's awareness, I turned up there in 2017 to a very small community and met with their CEO and said, do you want to get involved in space? And without even thinking about it, the CEO said, sure, why not? First question, what jobs will you provide my community? And at the time, we didn't really think about it too much. Everyone was getting excited about doing rocket launches, but that question stuck in the back of my mind. Anyway, fast forward to our first actual launch attempt out of the site. And as we're doing all of our preparations, this is the first time something like this has ever really happened in Australia. And we suddenly realized that we had to block off some of the roads. And so I almost embarrassingly called up the CEO and said, hey, would you be at all interested in handpicking some of your community members? We'll train them, we'll get all the formal training in place, but do they want a job to be a part of a space launch? And with that, the community just couldn't they're falling over themselves to get involved in this activity. We then discovered that the community themselves has about an 80% unemployment rate. So all of a sudden, the kids in town not only saw their parents being employed, they saw their parents being employed in the space industry. And we all gave them shirts with, space launch on the back and all the rest. And this became a real focal point for the community and something that the young people in the community really, really looked up to. And so at each and every activity that we do on the range, so we're expanding out the skills that we're providing to the community so they themselves can get more and more involved. They do, as I said, traffic management. They now do all of our site maintenance. They assist us with actual planning on the ranges. Where can objects return to so they're easily recovered, and they protect all the cultural heritage that is out in the middle of Australia. So this relationship has grown from one where they provided us with land to one where we're now really starting to work together and leveraging their unique knowledge of the sites, of the area, to make a better service offering for our customers, and one that we're looking forward to growing well into the future. So no, it's been very exciting.
That's a great story. Thank you. Okay, Enrico, can you talk a little bit about civil space, military space, commercial space, and the potential for collaboration between those sectors? What is your view on that?
Yeah, happy to talk to that. So obviously we are the National Civil Space Agency, and so our global counterparts our other civil agencies, NASA, European Space Agency, New Zealand, and so on. So from a bilateral engagement perspective, very much civil focused. But I think as everyone on this call understands, there's not much, if anything, in space that doesn't have a dual use nature to it, or definitely a national security link. So as a result, we do collaborate very closely with our Chief of Joint Capabilities and Space Command here in Australia. So that can be looking at, there's a one-to-one matching in priority areas around communications, PNT, space situation awareness, or domain awareness. And so, how do we collaborate around policy work for infrastructure, for workforce development in particular, on both the civil side and the defence side. So there's a close working relationship there. We collaborate on efforts like JCO, so space monitoring. So there's defence efforts around the world have more of a protect and defend mission. On the civil side, it's really around space traffic coordination and management, and how you do that domestically, but in a global environment. So I think we work closely. I think commercial space bridges both. They can have customers on the civil government side and the defence government side, and then direct to industry. And we see several of our. So as I said, we've invested in over 70 sector-facing procurements or grants. Many of those recipients are also, either contractors or have certain development activities with defence as well. From a regulator perspective, we will regulate the operations at Australian spaceports. And one thing I note is that I think in the long term is going to make the sector successful is these are commercially led spaceports. These are not the ranges that Michael and Lloyd talked about, but also the Gilmore site and others. They're commercially led. There may be various levels of stimulus or support, but they're commercially led, and they're commercially oriented to make it a successful business. And so they will launch, eventually national security payloads and commercial payloads. And so we have a MOU with what's called DASA in Australia, which is the Defence Aviation Safety Authority, as part of making sure we're sort of bridging requirements. So very collaborative, though, particularly internationally, we have our separate streams.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, Sandy, between the Falcon 9 and Starship, SpaceX has been conducting a lot of launches these days, and many people starting to express a concern that they may at some point become a monopoly. What is Rocket Lab's view on the importance of ensuring competition in the launch industry, and what can be done to ensure that customers will continue to have a choice when it comes to getting their payloads to orbit?
That's a good question. Thank you, Will. The large rocket operators love talking in dollar per kilo. And because that's a metric that looks very good on them. And what they do is that this is the cost of a launch. They take the cost of the maximum payload, and they just divide it, and that's what you get. Maybe that's the price you'd get if you would fly a whole bunch of concrete, and so you fill completely your rocket. Nobody ever get that price. But still, it's a good metric for them because that makes them look cheap. However, the bigger the rocket, the less flexible it becomes. Going on orbit is not just about going to any orbit. And we've seen over the last 10 years a big push for constellations. Typically, when a client has his first launch or two, they're not too picky about the orbit because it's often a demonstration launch or it's a first satellite of a constellation. But when they move to constellations, they become very picky. And so this is where Electron has been a great vehicle because we provide dedicated launches. If you compare a typical launch on Electron and the price that you get in dollar per kilo if you launch on Transporter, and by the way, Transporter loses money at every launch because it's not a program that is designed to make money. It's a program that is designed to artificially lower the price expectation to make the rest of the industry struggle. But if you compare the two, yeah, Electron is much more expensive. Similarly, a taxi is more expensive than taking a train. However, you get where you need to go. And so this has been the strength of a dedicated launch vehicle. For us, I have to say that the transporter program has not been too much of an issue, because we've really been focusing on the dedicated launch, and it's been actually really killing our competitors. Now we're developing Neutron to bring an alternative to SpaceX, and this is really something that our client ask. It's never good to have a position of monopoly. Some people would like an alternative because they feel that SpaceX can ask whatever they want, or some people want to fly with someone else because they want to be competitor offering a competitive a service that competes with SpaceX services. Now you bring Starship to market, and sure, they announce extremely low $ per kilo. First of all, are they really going to fly nearly empty? I doubt it, because operations do cost. What you gain in $ per kilo, again, you lose in flexibility. So I do not see Starship competing with Neutron, and if it would, then you'd expect them to remove Falcon 9. I don't think they have any plan to remove Falcon 9. You have different class of vehicle and different class of mass, and so it's just a different application, really. So obviously, on the media, it's expressed like Starship is going to capture everything. In practice, I don't think that's going to happen.
Very good, thanks. Okay, Michael, one of ELA's key differences is its resident launcher model. How has this resonated with rocket companies that you've engaged with, and do you see this as a model for the way spaceports will be managed in the future?
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, as I said before in talking about the sort of the standardization and what have we experienced, I think, different locations have different models. And early on, and our company was founded on the concept, I think, originally of, us being a landlord and having customers come here and establish and build their own spaceports. But the tyranny of distance, the cost, and the evolution of the market sort of gave rise to our concept of being the resident launcher, and we're trying to do it more as a turnkey. And it's funny, we've had a few companies who sit there and use what I would call third-grade economics to try and go, well, your model's more expensive that way. If I pay $65 million up front and then I have a cadence of 60 launches a year, and it's flawed in a number of ways, but it was founded in the idea of trying to reduce that cash flow burn up front for the companies, for us to accept a share in the risk by not getting our financial return until a long term, down the contract. And that has also driven to, the existing contracts that we have for 4, 5, and 8 years, in length. They're multiple launches. And so it's proving to be attractive. A lot of the companies, because it does come obviously with a large contingent liability on their balance sheet for forward launches. And, one of the questions that's in the chat box is, what is the sort of, manifest and contracted manifest? So we have a manifest contracted for well over 20 launches. And there is the ability at fixed pricing for them to do what we call insert launches. And because none of them are in those contracts are at high cadence yet, because they're evolutionary rocket programs, and that will take time for all of those guys to get there. But generally, I think the resident launcher model that we have developed is being well regarded. Like I said, it has its challenges in getting companies to accept and sign on the dotted line, but most people who are getting ready to launch are finding that they're running out of runway and can't hide anymore. So we've been inundated in the last quarter in particular, because this quarter equates to about 18 months from their first operational launches. And so given that the regulatory process is about a 12 to 13 month exercise, and for them to be ready and to do all the adjustment for that, they're running out of runway. And so we've been inundated with inbound inquiry, and keeping up with draft contract versions is a bit challenging, which is a nice problem to have, and is a real validation that our business model is real. That we've got customers who are paying money. We're in revenue mode. We're into developing and finite management of a wide variety of missions and obligations and requirements of our customers, and so yeah, it's working, and we're quite happy with it at the moment.
Excellent, thank you. Lloyd, what are some of the trade-offs between having a spaceport close to densely populated areas and one that's in a remote part of the country? And how do you ensure that you will have a qualified workforce in the future? How do you think about some of those issues?
No, great questions, George. So for everyone's awareness, so the Ceduna is the closest regional town to the Kaniba Test Range. Kaniba Test Range itself, the range head is all of about 4 or 4.5 kilometers from the Kaniba community themselves. So from a future workforce perspective, I'd like to think we're in the pound seat, given the current engagements that we have with the community and their interest, their engagement in getting involved in the space launch activities literally down the road from them. We're very lucky, though, that over the 41,000 square kilometers that is the Kaniba Test Range, there's only actually one other homestead, and we know them very well, and whenever we go and visit them, we have to take them the local newspaper and a box of chocolates. So it's a unique place as regional Australia, you could say. So that site is the one site that has people close by. Whalers Way, on the other hand, is actually quite a distance away from the regional city of Port Lincoln. So where we've been very lucky is that because of the existing infrastructure close to our launch sites, that has allowed us and allowed the companies that we've had attempting launches or undertaking launches from our site to actually use those industries where possible. So T-Space lost a launch vehicle on the launch pad. It's a recurring theme nowadays for space companies, a rite of passage, you could say. But we were able to go into Port Lincoln, and I kid you not, go into the auto stores and buy some replacement thermal tapes and the likes, and one American space company loves to talk about a hammer test. If you're out on the range and you open your toolbox and you realize you've forgotten your hammer back home, how far do you have to drive to go and get another thing as simple as a hammer? So, these are simple things that you potentially don't consider when you're thinking about doing rocket launches and the likes. And so if you are so far away from civilization where it's really easy, so to speak, to do the launch, but you lose your hammer, you're in a bit of a pickle. So no, it's been interesting from that aspect, operating close to these two centers. And what we've seen as, building on what Sandy said during his opening remarks, that the Australian industry or the adjacent industries are really getting involved in space, because we actually have quite a lot of high-tech industry already in Australia. So building submarines, air warfare destroyers, the nation is gearing up to now build a lot of defense missiles as well. So a lot of the individuals involved in those programs look to space as a short hop into something that is potentially even more sexy than frigates and submarines, So it's been interesting to see a lot of people reaching out, wanting to get involved, get employed in the space industry. So I don't think we're going to have too much of an issue there into the future.
Excellent, thank you.
If I can say a very quick remark to one thing that Lloyd just said, I think if you need a hammer on your rocket, there is a problem there.
Maybe launch pad, knocking, as we say in Australia, a star picket. I don't know if that's lost on our international listeners, but knocking in the old.
Very good.
Anyway.
Well, this has been an awesome discussion. Thank you so much, Enrico, Sandy, Michael, and Lloyd. Fantastic issues brought up and discussed. We didn't have time to answer all the questions in the chat box and all, but before we wrap up, I did want to invite one additional Australian to take the microphone. James Palmer is the CEO of Space Centre Australia, and he's had an extensive background in as a Royal Australian Navy submariner, and been an engineering manager and engineering network engineer for Leidos and Lockheed Martin Australia and many other things. But he and his group have been one of the Global Spaceport Alliance members who have been thinking about what kinds of agreements can spaceports have with one another to move the ball forward in terms of standards and how we work together. So James, if you could just take a few minutes and tell everybody about the MOU that you've been involved in developing, and see what you can share.
Yeah, not a problem. I hope everyone can hear me okay. George, thanks very much for the opportunity, and also the opportunity to talk first webinar, new member. So thanks very much to GSA. I really appreciate being a part of the team. I'll start my video as well. Sorry about that. Can you all see me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, thanks. So yeah, again, pleasure to be here. So thank you, and I'll keep it brief. Basically, with what we've been doing in terms of the space industry, is really working on an international collaboration piece, and so basically that's culminated into a starting point in a memorandum of understanding, and we were fortunate enough to initiate that MOU during this year's FAA GSA summit. And that was in Milan, and thank you very much, GSA, for helping us facilitate that. The MOU includes a number of spaceports globally: Virginia Spaceport, us, Space Centre Australia, Esrange Space Centre in Sweden, Saxa Vord in the UK, Hokkaido Spaceport in Japan, Pacific Spaceport Complex in Alaska, Sutherland Spaceport UK, and also Stargate Peru. And some of the key themes of this MOU are to identify potential commonalities between each party's strategic objectives, define policies, standards, processes, and operations, as the parties could adopt commonality to streamline their operations, and to also really provide a more harmonized approach towards managing launch operations. And really that also leads into developing and implementing resiliency and redundancy planning to maintain launch operations across multiple spaceports, fully identifying and respecting that no two spaceports are alike. But also you could compare that to no two international airports are alike by comparison, yet you can have the same types of aircraft operating and being serviced from those airports as a comparison. We also, as part of this, is to develop a purpose-built, secure information and data sharing platform, and compiling and maintaining appropriate and agreed information databases that can be available to each party, and then identify the services each party can provide, and make it a bit of a one-stop shop to prepare for and support launch operations. Assessing feasibility, benefits and costs of using standardized approaches among parties for providing these services. It complements a lot of what other spaceports advertise and say along the lines of looking after the launch vehicle and the launch vehicle's customer. So it is a very open policy. We're very keen to get more people involved and more companies, more spaceports involved. So the invitation is definitely there, and we'd welcome anyone else's interest to be a part of it and to help build this capability out further. And there's plenty of information that we can provide over time as well. And just again, so thanks to Global Spaceport Alliance for your assistance in helping facilitate that MOU at Milan. And yeah, we're looking forward to working on it with our team and the GSA team and others going into the future. And happy to answer any questions as well, if you might have.
Yes, thanks for that update. And I'm hoping that we can have additional information that you might be able to share at the Spaceport Summit in Orlando in January.
Definitely.
For
Yeah,
those
definitely.
spaceports that think they would like to be one of the signatories in the future. So
Sure.
appreciate that. Excellent. So great discussion today. And let me turn it back over to James for some closing remarks. James Causey.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you very much, all the speakers. I think it's fair to say that we did keep one of the best till the very end. So thank you all very much for your participation. I do want to just clarify one thing. In one of my slides, I mentioned GSA members that are working in Australia. And I was notified that American company is in fact also working in Australia. So just so you know that that's what's going on there. I want to encourage you all to register for the summit as soon as possible. And I also want to give a shout out to my friends at Austrade who helped enormously in helping putting the speakers together to make this webinar so successful. There will be a videotape of the whole webinar available within a week. And I believe Izzy may have already posted that up on the chat box. So you'll be able to see everything there. And for now, thank you all very much. Good night, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you.